You're watching the MMA Oracles Podcast, and now, presenting your host, Jack Moon.
This is the MMA Oracles Podcast, and I am your host, Jack Moon, and I'm just going to be diving right into this UFC Fight Night card here, UFC on ESPN 53. First fight of the night is a heavyweight pairing between Muhammad the Motor Usman taking on Mick Parkin. Usman is 34 years old. He is 10-2 overall, 4 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 4 decisions. He's currently 3-0 in the UFC. His best wins have come over Zach Pauga, Junior Tafa, and Jake Collier. He is the TUF 30 winner and the brother of Kamaru Usman, former UFC welterweight champion, and he's got some good knockout power in his hands. On the other side, Parkin is 28 years old. He is 8-0 undefeated, 5 knockouts, 1 submission, and 2 decisions. He is currently 2-0 in the UFC, and his best wins have come over Eduardo Neves, who he beat on the Contender Series to earn his UFC contract, Jamal Pogues, and Chao Machado. He is a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he really just sets a high volume and pace with his fights. Parkin is a minus 150 favorite, with Usman coming back as a plus 125 underdog. There's currently 1,565 Tapology votes on this fight. 59% of those are favoring Parkin. Of those 59%, 72% are taking him to win by decision. Of the 41% taking Usman, 68% have him winning by decision. I do kind of see this fight going to decision. I don't think either guy is going to be able to get a stoppage here. If anything, I think a stoppage would most likely favor Usman. He's more dangerous. I think he throws the heavier shots, but his striking isn't that technical. He does throw some kind of looping hooks. He's really only beaten low-end guys. If you look at it, like Zach Pauga is cut now. Junior Tafa just looked awful in his last performance, even though it was on short notice. And Jake Collier, I believe, has also been cut. It's not like Parkin's beaten much better people, Jamal Pogues and Chao Machado, but they are at least guys who are still in the UFC, still relevant, and are younger guys that are trying to make their way as well. So I am favoring Parkin. I do think he, like I mentioned, he sets a high pace with his fights, and I think he can outpace and outwork Usman. I think he's gonna just win on volume alone. I think he wrestles as well. I think that's gonna help wear out Usman and keep him out of danger from the heavy shots. He'll have to be careful closing the distance. But like I said, Usman's striking technique isn't good. So those winging shots, I think he'll be able to see them coming and avoid them to close the distance, clinch him up, wrestle him, just outpace him and outwork him, and get more dominant as the fight goes on, because I think Usman will start to slow down. So for my official pick, give me Mick Parkin by unanimous decision. Up next on the card, we have a pair of debuting flyweights as Igor Severino is taking on Andre Mascote Lima. Severino is 20 years old. He is 8-0, undefeated with 4 knockouts and 4 submissions. He is a Contender Series winner. This is his UFC debut. Like I mentioned, he is a former Jungle Fight champion, and he's got a pretty good team behind him at Shootbox João Emilio. And he is obviously super dangerous, finished all of his pro fights, split evenly between knockout and submission. So he doesn't really care where the fight goes, but he is chasing that finish. On the other side, Lima is 25 years old. He is also 7-0 undefeated, 5 knockouts, 2 decisions. He's also a Contender Series winner and making his debut here. He's got a decent team behind him as well at Team Lucas Monero. Probably a little more put together, a little more composed, I would say. He's a little bit older as well. I think that kind of comes with the territory there. Lima is currently sitting at a minus 185 favorite, with Severino coming back as a plus 150 underdog. There's currently 1,399 Tapology votes on this fight. 68% of those are favoring Lima. Of those 68%, 72% are taking him to win by decision. Of the 32% taking Severino to win, 48% are taking him to win by decision. I don't think this fight's going to decision. I'm loving Severino here as an underdog. I do think he has the better team behind him. He is the more well-rounded fighter, and I think he's actually beaten better competition as well. If you look at the guys they fought on the Contender Series, I think the one guy that Lima beat had a very padded record. He was like 13 or 14-1, but he fought a bunch of trash. So it was like even though he was 14-1 coming against a guy who was only 6-0 in Lima, Lima was still a massive favorite going into that fight because the guy he was fighting was just an overrated bum, basically. So there is some things that worry me about Severino for sure. He is reckless, still unproven. Even though he's beaten better competition, it's regional competition. It's not like there's anyone worth naming. He might lose rounds. I did see him kind of lose positioning on the Contender Series, but I think that his well-rounded skill set and his just willingness to chase the finish and aggression, I think that's going to be an edge for him here. I think he's going to be able to get the finish. If it goes a decision, I could probably see Lima edging it out. But like I said, I don't think it will. Severino really is going to chase that finish. He's really aggressive. I think he'll be able to initiate some grappling exchanges, and it seems like he's the better grappler here. I think he's obviously the much more proven finisher with his grappling. I think if he gets Lima down, I think he can threaten with submissions and put him away. And I think Lima is just going to have a hard time containing all that energy, containing that aggression from Severino. I think Severino is going to put a pace on him. I think he'll grapple with him, and I think eventually he'll get to a spot where he can lock something up. So give me, for the official pick, Igor Severino by submission in the second round. For the next fight on the card, we move to the worst division in the UFC, the women's bantamweight division, as Montserrat Monster Rendon is taking on Daria Zalesniakova. In the red corner, Rendon is 35 years old. She is 6-0 undefeated with 6 decisions. She's currently 1-0 in the UFC, her best win being that UFC debut victory as she defeated Tamirez. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her first name correct. Tamirez Vidal. She is a national Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion. She's decent on the ground, but she's not really great anywhere and not a great athlete. From what I've seen from her, she was able to wrestle Vidal well pretty in her debut, but really just doesn't stand out to me anywhere. On the other side, Zalesniakova is 28 years old. She is 8-1 overall with 5 knockouts and 3 decisions. She does have a background in kickboxing. She's got good power in her strikes. Her only loss in her career was a fluke early stoppage. She was hurt, but there was only 1 second left in the round. I think they could have let it go, and I think she was winning that fight beforehand. So a bit of a fluke loss there for her. She does have a win over a former UFC fighter in Liana Jojua, but her takedown defense is not good. Zalesniakova is coming into this fight as a minus 175 favorite, with Rendon coming back as a plus 140 underdog. It's currently 1,459 Tapology votes on this fight. 55% of those are favoring the underdog Rendon, with 89% of those taking her to win by decision. Of the 45% taking Zalesniakova, 78% are taking her to win by decision. The way I see this fight, I think either Zalesniakova lands some big shots and probably puts Rendon away, or Rendon takes her down and lays on her until the final bell. I really don't want to watch 15 minutes of this shit fight, so I'm really leaning towards Zalesniakova. I think the UFC probably is as well. I think she's definitely the more marketable fighter. She's younger, better looking as well, at least in my opinion. And obviously the more entertaining fighter. Rendon's never finished a fight. Zalesniakova has that striking background, 5 knockouts. I am worried about Zalesniakova's takedown defense. it's pretty bad. And like I mentioned, Rendon was able to wrestle Tamara Vidal pretty well in her UFC debut. So it's definitely not something I'm going to be betting on, especially with Zalesniakova as a favorite anyway. But I think Zalesniakova's striking is by far the best attribute either fighter possesses here. Like, Rendon's wrestling looked okay in her debut, but Zalesniakova's striking looks good, not just okay. It looks good. So her power is pretty good as well for this division. So I am going to lean on the fighter who has the best skill set, which is Zalesniakova. She might get laid on. This might be boring, but yeah, I think she can get it done. I don't think Rendon's that good, and I don't trust her striking defense early. So for the official pick, give me Daria Zalesniakova by knockout in the first round. Moving to the featherweight division for this next fight, we see Yarno Aarons taking on Steven the Ninja Win. Win is 30 years old. He is 9-1 overall with 4 knockouts, 3 submissions, and 2 decisions. He is 2-1 on the Contender Series. He's got really sharp striking and a great team behind him at Fortis MMA, but he's really only beaten the low-end competition. So this is going to be a test for him in his UFC debut. Aarons is 29 years old. He is 13-5-1 overall with 3 knockouts, 5 submissions, and 5 decisions. He is currently 0-2 in the UFC. He needs a win here pretty badly, so I expect him to be coming in highly motivated. He does hold a first-round knockout win over Max Koga on the regional scene. He doesn't really have a good team behind him, and it just seems like even though he's got potential, he just hasn't been able to put everything together, and I think that could be because of the team he's at. Going into this fight, Win is a minus 220 favorite, with Aarons coming back as a plus 175 underdog. It's currently 1,481 Tapology votes on this fight. 91% of those are favoring Win, with 61% of those taking him to win by decision. Of the 9% taking Aarons, 55% of those are taking him to win by decision. I think if Aarons wrestles in this fight and he's able to consistently get it to the floor, I think he would have a chance to pull off the upset. I think he's the better grappler. Win. I'm not entirely sold on Win yet. Like I said, he's only really beaten pretty terrible fighters. So even though he had that impressive knockout on the Contender Series to get his UFC debut, it was over AJ Cunningham, who we just saw him make his UFC debut on short notice, and he got knocked out again. That's what he does. Yeah, not entirely sold on Win, but, Aarons, like I said, he just hasn't been able to put everything together. I've seen potential in him. There's parts of his game that I like, but just when he gets in there, it's not there. It's not where it needs to be. Decisions don't get made the right way. And we just haven't seen a willingness from him to push the wrestling and push his grappling in the past. Despite him having 5 submission wins, he doesn't, in either of his UFC fights, he hasn't, really gone for many takedowns or landed many takedowns. So I think if we see him try and strike with Win here, Win's going to outclass him on the feet. Win is very fast. He's got good combinations. Like I said, his striking is good. It looks sharp. So, yeah, I think Win will be able to outclass Aarons on the feet here, and that's what we're going to get for the majority of this fight. Aarons has never been finished. Wouldn't necessarily be shocked if Win gets it done that way, but I think more likely he just picks his shots, kind of beats him up on the feet for the full 15 minutes. So for the official pick, give me Steven Win by unanimous decision. Dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have a matchup here between Miles Chapo Johns taking on Cody the Renegade Gibson. Johns is 29 years old. He is 13-2 overall with 4 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 7 decisions. He's currently 4-2 in the UFC. His best wins have been over Kevin Natividad, Anderson Dos Santos, and Vince Morales. Does have big power for the division. He's got good boxing. He's a former LFA champion, and he's got a great team behind him at Fortis MMA. He is stepping into this fight on short notice. Gibson was originally supposed to be facing Davey Grant in this bout, but Davey Grant had to pull out, so Miles Johns steps in. Gibson is 36 years old. He is 19-9 overall with 7 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 8 decisions. He is 1-4 in the UFC. His best wins have been over Wallell Watson, Johnny Bedford, Gustavo Arak, John Dodson, and Francisco Rivera. He is big for the division. He's 5'10", bantamweight. He throws a high volume. He's got dangerous striking. He'll throw good knees, flying knees, things like that because he is so big. He can hit these smaller guys with it easy. He's got a foundation in wrestling as well. Pretty well-rounded fighter. Coming into this fight, Johns is a minus 125 favorite despite taking it on short notice, and Gibson is a plus 105 underdog. Even though Gibson's the underdog, it seems like everyone is picking him. All the analysts I see are picking him, and I think he's overrated. The fans don't seem to be going that way. There's currently 1,390 Tapology votes on this fight. 76% of those are favoring Johns, with 82% of those taking him to win by decision. Of the 24% taking Gibson, 60% of those are taking him to win by decision as well. Like I mentioned, seems like the analysts are taking Gibson, but I'm sticking with the favorite here. I think Gibson's overrated. He's 36 years old. He has an injury history, I'm pretty sure, with his knees or ankles. Doesn't really have a great team behind him. I've seen him listed as his head coach as John Hackleman, which is good, but it doesn't seem like there's a consistent team behind him. He's not as accurate of a striker as Johns. He's not as good defensively. He's probably the slightly better wrestler and grappler, but Johns has really good takedown defense. Johns is more powerful. He does have bouts of inactivity, and I've seen other analysts kind of breaking that down, that just the activity alone of Gibson is going to win him these rounds. But I don't see it. Like I said, I think Gibson's overrated. Johns, he has been able to set a high pace in some of his fights. He does have bouts of inactivity, but he's the more accurate striker. Like I mentioned, he's got great takedown defense, good striking defense as well. So even though Gibson's going to be throwing volume, I don't think they're going to be landing very well. And I think Johns, being the more powerful, accurate striker, is going to land the more telling blows of this fight. I think he'll have the much more significant moments. Even if he's not as throwing as much, it'll look like he's winning the rounds just because he's landing the more powerful shots and, controlling it in that way instead of just with volume. That does mean it could come down to a close decision, especially with some iffy judging that we've seen throughout the UFC's history, but especially lately we've seen some questionable judging. It's going to kind of come down to what these judges favor more. Do they favor those power shots of Gibson? Do they favor the damage? I believe they're supposed to. Or do they favor just the volume of Gibson? Judging criteria, what I think should win a fight: damage, more significant moments. I think those are going to go to Johns. So for the official pick, give me Miles Johns by unanimous decision. Jumping back up to the featherweight division, we have a matchup here between Ricardo Carcasina Ramos taking on Julian Juicy J Erosa. Ramos is 28 years old. He is 16-5 overall with 4 knockouts, 7 submissions, and 5 decisions. He's currently 7-4 in the UFC. His best wins have been over Alan Nascimento, Michinori Tanaka, Ayman Zahabi, and Kyung-Ho Kang. He's got a great team behind him at Team Alpha Male. He's the former EFC champ. He is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he is dangerous everywhere. He throws wild spinning techniques on the feet. We've seen him win multiple times with spinning elbow knockouts. and he's got super dangerous submissions. So an exciting fighter to watch and dangerous everywhere. On the other side, Arosa is 34 years old, 28-11 overall, with 11 knockouts, 12 submissions, and 5 decisions. A lot of what I just said about Ramos can be said about Arosa as well. Just super entertaining to watch, dangerous everywhere, always chasing that finish. He is currently 6-7 in the UFC. His best wins have been over Marcin. I'm definitely going to pronounce his last name wrong. Marcin Rosarek, um, Jamal Emmers, Sean Woodson, Nate Landwehr, Charles Jordan, and Hakeem Dawodu. He has a great team behind him as well at Extreme Couture. He is dangerous everywhere, like I mentioned, chases the finish, and he'll throw some flashy techniques as well. So this should be a fun one. Ramos is minus 175 favorite going into this fight, with Arosa coming back as a plus 150 underdog. There's currently 1,483 Tapology votes on the fight. 75% of those are favoring Ramos, with 71% taking him to win by knockout. Of the 25% taking Arosa, 45% are taking him to win by decision. Rosa scored a decision win over Hakeem Dawodu, and he had a nice little winning streak going on. And that decision win, it seemed like he'd improved his game. You know, one of the main things that Rosa, his setbacks have been striking defense. You know, he kind of keeps his hands low. He's been knocked out a bunch of times. Um, he was cut from the UFC, returned. It seemed like when he got that win over Dawodu, it was like finally he's starting to put it all together. You know, he's got a ton of potential, dangerous and good everywhere. And finally, his defense is kind of coming along. And then he went out and got knocked out by Alex Caceres. Okay, not a terrible loss because Alex Caceres is in the top 15. But then he took on the debuting Fernando Padilla, which don't even know why he took that fight. And then he got knocked out by him in the first round. So it was like, now we're looking at Rosa, and all of those worries about his defense are back to the forefront. And that's why Ramos is the favorite here. Uh, both fighters are super aggressive. They'll both throw wild, flashy techniques. Either one could pull off a win here. But with those defensive worries for Rosa, it's hard not to favor Ramos. Ramos is aggressive early as well. And it's just hard not to, at this point, it's hard not to imagine him catching Rosa early and putting him away. So I do think that will happen. I'm a big fan of both guys here, so I hate to see either one take a loss, especially at Rosa because he's already 6-7 in the UFC. It could mean that this will be a third loss in a row. Could be the end of his UFC career, but that's kind of where we're at. His defense just isn't where it needs to be, and Ramos is going to come after him and be looking to land those shots, and Ramos is going to be aware of that as well, especially with his team behind him. You know that Arosa's defense isn't great, so I expect him to be on the attack early. For the official pick, give me Ricardo Ramos by knockout in the first round. For the next fight on the card, we hop up to the lightweight division as Kurt Holobaugh is taking on Trey Samurai Ghost Ogden. Holobaugh is 37 years old. He is 20-7 overall with 7 knockouts, 10 submissions, and 3 decisions. He's currently 1-4 in the UFC. He went 0-1 in Strikeforce. He is the TUF 31 winner. He's coming off that victory that won him the season over Austin Hubbard, one of his best wins. His other best wins have been over Des Green, that won him the Titan FC title, Josias Cavalcante, and Jason Knight on The Ultimate Fighter as well. On the other side, Ogden is 34 years old. He is 16-6 overall with 11 submissions and 5 decisions. He's currently 1-2 in the UFC. Really should be 2-2, as his last fight was a no contest in a fight he was dominating and just got stopped by a referee error. So should be 2-2, but it is what it is. His best wins have been over TJ Brown, JJ Ikonovich, and Daniel Zellhuber. Ogden's coming into this fight as a minus 150 favorite with Hollabaugh coming back as a plus 125 underdog. It's currently 1,492 Tapology votes on the fight. 66% of those are favoring Hollabaugh, with 55% of those taking him to win by decision. Of the 34% taking Ogden, 78% of those are taking him to win by decision. The fans seem to be favoring the underdog in this one, but I am not. Hollabaugh is 37 years old. I've never really thought he was that good. He did surprise on the Ultimate Fighter, but I think he was kind of losing that fight to Austin Hubbard. Ended up turning things around, pulling off the submission. But again, he's going to be going against another fighter that can kind of do those same things that Austin Hubbard did to him. So I think Ogden should be aware of that, that Hollabaugh has that ability where he's always dangerous. But Ogden is probably a better grappler as well. He's also a little bit younger here than Hollabaugh. He's the better athlete, and I think he should just be able to outwork him. I think the wrestling and grappling are going to be enough to just kind of win Ogden the rounds. Hollabaugh is dangerous with his own grappling, so he has to be careful. He can't let Hollabaugh get back into this fight the way Austin Hubbard did. But yeah, if Ogden just pushes his game, fights his fight, he'll be able to outwork Hollabaugh and ride out the decision victory, win the round. So for the official pick, give me Trey Ogden by unanimous decision. We drop back down to the featherweight division for this next fight on the card between Fernando El Valiente Padilla taking on Luis Corazon de Leon Pejuelo. Padilla is 27 years old. He is 15-5 overall with 5 knockouts, 8 submissions, and 2 decisions. He's currently 1-1 in the UFC. His best wins have come over Derek Minner, who he beat outside the UFC, and Julian Erosa, who he knocked out in his UFC debut. On the other side, Pejuelo is 29 years old. He is 8-1 overall with 7 knockouts and 1 decision. He is a Contender Series winner. He's making his UFC debut here. His only loss has been by split decision, and he knocked out Robbie Ring on the Contender Series in the first round to get his UFC contract. Padilla is coming into this fight as a minus 170 favorite, with Pejuelo coming back as a plus 145 underdog. It's currently 1,455 Tapology votes on the fight. 57% of those are favoring Pejuelo, with 65% taking him to win by knockout. Of the 43% taking Padilla, 51% are taking him to win by knockout. Fans are favoring the underdog again here, but again, I am not. Padilla has more experience. He's fought the higher level of competition, and he's the more well-rounded fighter, so I do like him in this fight. I wasn't really impressed with Pejuelo on the Contender Series, even though he scored that first-round knockout. He was fighting a guy who was only 6-0. I don't think Robbie Ring had fought really any good competition either, so a bit of a padded record. Even though he finished him in the first round, he had him hurt earlier in the fight, and he kind of let him off the hook and let him get back into the fight, which was something I didn't like to see. His takedown defense wasn't good either, and even though he was billed as only 1 inch taller, he looked a lot bigger than his opponent and a lot more powerful. I think he dropped him with like the first leg kick he threw in the opening seconds, just dropped his opponent. Yeah, so kind of a weird performance there. Wasn't too impressed with it, even though he scored that first round knockout. Padilla definitely disappointed me in his last outing. He lost a decision to Kyle Nelson. So he's shown that he's inconsistent and really unreliable as well. So I wouldn't bet on this fight. Not really high on either fighter. Pejuelo, I think, like I said, he kind of crushed a can, in my opinion. Not that Robbie Ring is a can and is going to be, nothing. I think Robbie Ring was a young guy. He could probably come back. But as of right now, not a great fighter. And that's his best win. Everyone else he beaten was bums. And like I said, there was negatives in that performance as well. So Padilla looked super impressive, knocked out Julian Erosa in his debut. Julian Erosa is a dangerous guy, ton of experience. And then he goes out and he loses to a guy like Kyle Nelson, who basically had one foot out the door. So, yeah, not really high on either guy. I'm going to stick with the more experienced fighter who's taken on higher level competition, who is more well rounded. I think if Padilla can get this fight to the floor, I think he'd have a big advantage. He's, I believe, a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, under 10th Planet Jiu Jitsu. So, yeah, I mean, I think if he gets to the floor, there's even a chance he could pull off the submission. Everyone seems to be picking knockout. I think if Padilla just stays on the feet and solely strikes with Pajuelo, I think he can still win, but it's the tougher route for sure. But Padilla's fight IQ obviously isn't that great. So, yeah, this one's a toss-up. I'm staying away from it for sure, betting-wise. But I will stick with the favorite. For my official pick, give me Fernando Padilla to win by unanimous decision. Staying in the featherweight division here, we have a matchup between Billy Quarantillo taking on Yusuf the Moroccan Devil Zalal. Quarantillo is 35 years old. He is 18-5 overall with 8 knockouts, 5 submissions, and 5 decisions. He's currently 6-3 in the UFC. His best wins in his career have been over Kama Worthy, Spike Carlisle, Kyle Nelson, Gabriel Benitez, Alexander Hernandez, and Damon Jackson. On the other side, Zalal is 27 years old. He is 13-5-1 overall with 4 knockouts, 6 submissions, and 3 decisions. He's currently 3-3-1 in the UFC. He did get cut, and he's coming back to the UFC here in this fight. He picked up 3 straight wins outside the UFC to earn his way back. His best wins in his career have been his UFC wins over Austin Lingo, Jordan Griffin, and Peter Barrett. Quarantillo is coming into this fight as a minus 165 favorite, with Zalal coming back as a plus 135 underdog. It's currently 1,404 Tapology votes on the fight. 76% of those are favoring Quarantillo, with 76% of those taking him to win by decision. Of the 24% taking Zalal, 56% of those are taking him to win by decision. Zalal is younger. He has a 5-inch reach advantage. He's got a great team behind him at Factory X. He's making his UFC return here. I think he's going to be highly motivated. He can be a bit of a tricky fighter, so I wouldn't be shocked if Zalal pulls off this upset. Quarantillo, he's 35 years old, getting a little bit older. His style is a guy that, brawls and sets a high pace. It kind of wears out his fighters and finishes them late. So I don't think that style is good for a fighter who's getting older either. So we could see this as a first step of a decline for Quarantillo, and Zalal could kind of surpass him. But it's hard to pick Zalal when he's coming back to the UFC and the guy he just beat was 0-0. Like, how does a win over a fighter who's never fought get you back into the UFC? Yeah, that is the kind of determining factor for me here. Zalal's really never, if you look at the guys he's beaten, Austin Lingo no longer in the UFC, Jordan Griffin no longer in the UFC, Peter Barrett no longer in the UFC, and those are his best wins. He's never beaten anyone's good. Like Billy Q, Kama Worthy's no longer in the UFC, but he beat him outside the UFC. Spike Carlisle no longer in the UFC, but he's still fighting in bigger organizations. He's pretty good. Kyle Nelson's hanging around in the UFC, but not the best. Gabriel Benitez doesn't have the best UFC record, but he's a good fighter. Alexander Hernandez, same kind of thing. He's a good fighter as well. And Damon Jackson. All those guys are tough. Consistently facing a higher level of competition, has hung around the UFC, whereas Zalal ended up getting cut, and he's coming back with a win over an 0-0 fighter. Yeah, I just have to stick with the more consistent, more experienced, higher level of competition guy again here. So for my official pick, give me Billy Quarantillo by unanimous decision. Dropping back down to the bantamweight division again, the next matchup on this card is Peyton Talbot taking on Cameron MSP Simon. Talbot is 25 years old. He is 7-0, undefeated, with 5 knockouts, 1 submission, and 1 decision. He is a Contender Series winner, and he's 1-0 in the UFC now. His best wins have been his Contender Series victory over Reyes Cortez and his UFC debut victory over Nick Aguirre. On the other side, Simon is 23 years old. He is 9-1 overall with 6 knockouts, 1 submission, and 2 decisions. He is also a Contender Series winner. He is 3-1 in the UFC, and his best wins have been over Amanda Ribas and Terrence Mitchell. He's got a great team behind him at Team CIT, who also trains the current UFC middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis, and he's coming off the first ever loss of his career to Christian Rodriguez. Talbot's coming into this fight as a minus 140 favorite, with Simon coming back as a plus 120 underdog. There's currently 1,545 Tapology votes on this fight, with 57% of those favoring Simon. 78% are taking him to win by decision. Of the 43% taking Talbot, 68% are taking him to win by decision. The fans are favoring a lot of underdogs in this fight, on this fight card. They're favoring the underdog again here, and so am I, actually. Simon's coming off the first ever loss of his career, and I think that's honestly going to be a valuable experience for him. Christian Rodriguez is a good fighter, and I think Simon's going to walk away with some valuable lessons from that fight. Like I mentioned, he's got that good team behind him as well. I think they're going to be able to kind of let those lessons sink in, get him back to where he needs to be, and have him ready to go here as a new and improved version of him. I think even the Simon that we've seen previously going against a guy like Talbot, like, take away that loss to Christian Rodriguez, if that fight didn't happen, is Talbot really the betting favorite going into this fight? I don't think so. And I don't think a loss to Christian Rodriguez is really anything to be ashamed of. We just saw him beat Isaac Dalgarian, even though that was a close whatever decision. But, like, the guy has spoiled multiple undefeated prospects now in a row. So, no shame in that loss. I think it's going to be a learning experience for him, and I think he's just going to get better. Talbot's a good prospect himself. Don't get me wrong. I like Talbot. He's undefeated. I think he's going to be competitive in this fight for sure. But I don't know. Against a guy like Simon, I like Simon a lot. Both fighters do throw a high volume. I think Talbot's volume, at least on paper, is a little overblown because he's only got that one UFC fight compared to where Simon has much more experience in the UFC octagon. I do think Simon is the more well-rounded fighter as well. Even though both guys only have one submission, I think Simon is the better offensive wrestler. He will look for takedowns, whereas Talbot, I think, is really just kind of looking for striking, even though I think he submitted Nick Aguirre in his UFC debut. He did. He won by rear naked choke, but I don't think he was the one pushing the grappling. I think Aguirre kind of pushed the grappling, and then Talbot was able to capitalize and reverse and end up submitting him. That is something that Simon will have to be careful of. Talbot is the bigger guy, lankier fighter, so that could favor him in the grappling exchanges. But I think the volume, the striking technique, Simon is going to be able to kind of get the better of that on the feet. I think if he does run into any issues, he has the wrestling to control the fight as well. I think Talbot will remain competitive, like I said. I think he'll definitely have some moments being the bigger fighter, especially early on. But I think once Simon kind of gets his game rolling, I think he's going to take over. So for the official pick, give me Cameron Simon to win by unanimous decision. Next up on the card, we have a middleweight pairing between Edmund the Golden Boy Shabazian taking on AJ Dobson. Shabazian is 26 years old. He is 12-4 overall with 10 knockouts, 1 submission, and 1 decision. He is a Contender Series winner. He is 5-4 in the UFC. All 4 of those losses have come within his last 5 fights as well. Guy definitely needs a win here. His best wins have been over Darren Stewart, Jack Marshman, Brad Tavares, and Dalcia Lungiambula. He's got a great team behind him in Extreme Couture, and his back is against the wall coming into this fight. Dobson is 32 years old. He is 7-2 overall with 2 knockouts, 3 submissions, and 2 decisions. He is also a Contender Series winner. He's 1-2 in the UFC currently. His best win was over Tafon Nchukwi in his last outing. It was a decision victory. Even though he's coming off that win, I think his back is against the wall too. He's 1-2 in the UFC. I think another loss here would be not good for him. Going into this fight, the odds are favoring Shabazian as a minus 185 favorite, with Dobson coming back as a plus 150 underdog. It's currently 1,538 Tapology votes on the fight. 83% of those are favoring Shabazian, with 54% taking him to win by decision. Of the 17% taking Dobson, 50% are taking him to win by decision. I have seen some analysts picking Dobson to win in this fight. But the way I'm looking at it, if Shabazian can't win this fight, he should just retire. Like, you're 1-4 over your last 5. If you lose, he broke into the top 15. He's got wins over guys like Brad Tavares. Jack Marshman's a veteran. He was a good fighter. Darren Stewart's dangerous. Dalcia Lungiambula was dangerous. If you can't beat AJ Dobson at this point, what are you doing? I know you're only 26, but like, you've plateaued and declined if you can't beat a guy like Dobson. So yeah, I see some other analysts taking Dobson. I don't really know why. I think he's been a complete bust since joining the UFC. His only win is a decision over Tafon Nchukwi, who was also a complete bust and has been cut from the UFC roster. Really, the only way I see Shabazian losing this fight is if he gasses himself out early looking for a finish, or just makes a complete bonehead, idiotic mistake and ends up getting caught and finished. Dobson is a guy who is durable, at least. He's got some power, so Shabazian can't just like go in there willy-nilly and just take him lightly, but he's just not that good either. So Shabazian has definitely showed a much higher level so far in his career, higher level of just, I think, everything, striking, wrestling. He should be able to win this fight no matter where it goes if he comes in here and performs the way that he knows that he can. Yeah, I think Dobson, like I said, just lower level guy. Haven't been impressed with him. Doesn't look like he should be really. If you look at the best version of each fighter, Shabazian's still a much higher level. I think he just outclasses him here. I wouldn't be surprised if Shabazian's able to score a knockout, but Dobson's never been finished. He's at least somewhat durable, so I think Shabazian will be able to do damage with his striking once he kind of realizes that he's not going away. Shabazian does have some decent wrestling as well, so I think he'll be able to kind of fall back on that when he needs to and win the round. So for the official pick, give me Edmund Shabazian by unanimous decision. In the co-main event of the evening, we have a heavyweight pairing between Carl Williams taking on Justin Badman Tafa. Williams is 34 years old. He is 9-1 overall with 3 knockouts and 6 decisions. He is a Contender Series winner. He is 1-0 in the PFL and 2-0 in the UFC. His best wins have been his 2 UFC victories over Lucas Bresky and Chase Sherman. He kind of sets a high pace and likes to wrestle, so he's been able to just kind of I don't really want to say run over because he's not finishing them, but really been able to dominate these lower end fighters so far. This is definitely a step up in competition for him. He is taking on Tafa, who is 30 years old. He is 7-3 overall and 4-3 in the UFC. His best wins have come over Juan Adams, Parker Porter, and Austin Lane. This is a fighter with one-shot knockout power. He's a fan favorite as well. definitely the crowd will be on his side. So yeah, good test for Williams. Good test for Tafa as well, though. Williams is coming in as a minus 225 favorite, with Tafa coming back as a plus 185 underdog. It's currently 1,523 Tapology votes on the fight. 57% of those are favoring Tafa, with 92% of those taking him to win by knockout. Of the 43% taking Williams, 71% take him to win by decision. Fans are going with another underdog here on this fight card. I do kind of agree with the consensus on how the fight will play out, but not on who the winner will be. I think either Tafa will win by knockout or Williams will win by decision. But I am leaning towards Williams. Either Tafa's gonna come out here and knock him out early. If he can shut down a takedown, Williams is gonna be in trouble. Or Tafa's gonna get taken down, beaten up on the floor, lose rounds, maybe even get stopped later on. Both fighters, we haven't seen Tafa really get taken down in the UFC. He's listed as having 100% takedown defense. Williams, though, is a guy who consistently pressures, consistently goes for takedowns. He's got good striking defense as well. So both fighters have the defense, at least on paper, to stop the other one's game. So a little bit of an interesting matchup, but yeah, honestly, I get that Toph is a fan favorite. I think that's what is kind of putting this in his favor. But I mean, if you look at it, Williams has looked good. I know he's 34 and he's beating low end guys, but he looks good. He looks like a well put together fighter. He definitely has the game plan to win this fight for sure. I think he's got better fight IQ. And like I said, he's a guy that just pressures and will wrestle consistently. So I don't think he's going to stand in the way of those power shots. I don't think we're going to see many prolonged striking exchanges. If we do, Williams is the bigger fighter. I think he'll be able to kind of stay on the outside, stay away from the power. He's 6'3" compared to Tafa's 6 foot. He does have a 5-inch reach advantage as well. So I think Williams will kind of be able to stay on the outside or stay all the way on the inside, clinch him up, look to take him down, shoot for the takedowns, just avoid the power shots of Tafa. And it's not like Tafa is a dynamic striker or a very quick guy. So I think the better athlete is Williams. And yeah, I do think the wrestling and grappling is going to win out here, not the striking. Unfortunately, I think Tafa, winning this fight would definitely be more entertaining. I think watching him score that knockout would be fun, but we don't always get the funnest or best outcome in MMA. We get the more realistic one, which in my opinion is Williams taking him down, beating him up on the floor. And riding out the rounds. So for the official pick, give me Carl Williams by unanimous decision. It's time for the main event of the evening here. We have a women's flyweight pairing between Amanda Ribas taking on Thug Rose Namajunas. Ribas is 30 years old. She is 12-4 overall with 3 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 5 decisions. She's currently 7-3 in the UFC. Her best wins have been over Ariane Carnelossi, who she beat outside the UFC actually, Mackenzie Dern, Randa Marcos, Paige Van Zandt, Verna Jandiroba, Viviane Araujo, and Luana Pinheiro. She is a high-level grappler, and she just won a fight over Luana Pinheiro with a wheel kick, knocked her out with a wheel kick. So her striking is definitely getting better. She's kind of she's shown that she can be dynamic on the feet, and we all know she's got that grappling background. On the other side, Namajunas is 31 years old. She is 11-6 overall with 2 knockouts, 5 submissions, and 4 decisions. She is the former UFC strawweight champion, Tough 20 finalist. She's 9-5 in the UFC, and her best wins have been over. She beat Joanne Wood and Randa Marcos on The Ultimate Fighter, and then in the UFC, she's beaten Angela Hill, Paige Van Zandt, Tisha Torres, Michelle Watterson, Joanna Jędrzejczyk twice, Jessica Andrade, and Weili Zhang twice. Namajunas is coming into this fight as a minus 185 favorite, with Ribas coming back as a plus 150 underdog. It's currently 1,671 Tapology votes on the fight. 78% of those are favoring Namajunas. 63% of those are taking her to win by decision. Of the 23% taking Ribas, 70% are taking her to win by decision. Namajunas has been facing top-level competition pretty much her entire career. That's kind of the reason for her spotty record of 11-6. But that reason is also her mental game. Sometimes she just doesn't show up. She put on one of the worst fights ever in her second fight with Carla Esparza. I did kind of predict that one to go that way. I picked Carla to win. But yeah, there's times where she just doesn't show up and doesn't look like herself. So if she does that here, Ribas is a good fighter. She is a good fighter, and I think she'll take it to Namajunas, and she'll end up pulling off the upset and winning this fight. That being said, we have to assume that Namajunas is going to show up in shape and ready to go. Can never, expect that a fighter is going to show up out of shape for whatever reason, unless she does have a history of kind of those mental issues, but not enough for me to assume that going into a fight yet. Namajunas is bigger. I think she's the better striker. She definitely has solid grappling as well. I don't think Ribas would outclass her on the floor. Namajunas has only ever been finished twice in her career. Once by submission, that was in her UFC debut, which was for the UFC strawweight title. It was her fourth pro fight against the much more experienced Carla Esparza, who's a solid wrestler, took her down, submitted her. And then her other loss that she was finished in was a knockout when she got slammed by Jessica Andrade. So I really don't see Ribas being able to finish this fight. She doesn't have that wrestling ability of Esparza, so I don't think she'd be able to kind of hold Namajunas down and control her on the floor that way. I think Namajunas has improved in that area as well since that fight. Nor does she have the power of Andrade, where she's not going to be able to slam her and knock her out. So, I don't really see Ribas being able to finish the fight. I think if she wins, she would have to win a decision. And I think that's just going to be a tough ask. Whereas the other way, Ribas has been knocked out in 3 of her 4 losses. She got knocked out by Macy Barber, Marina Rodriguez, and Polyana Viana. The only fighter that's beaten Ribas that didn't knock her out was Katlyn Sermonara, who can't finish a fight for any reason. She hasn't finished a single fight in the UFC. Her last finish was in 2016. So, yeah. Besides that, if Ribas is losing, she's getting knocked out. Namajunas, she has surprising pop and accuracy in her strikes. She only has 2 knockouts on her record, but if you think about them, those 2 knockouts are crazy. She knocked out Joanna Jędrzejczyk to win the UFC strawweight title, and then she knocked out Weili Zhang with that head kick to win it again. So, I think we get one of those performances from Namajunas here. I think her back is kind of against the wall. She's, coming off some losses. She's in a new division. She really needs this victory. And I think she shows up and gets it. I expect Namajunas to look sharp here. Her striking's going to look good. I think she's going to hurt Ribas and be able to put her away. Give me, for the official pick, Rose Namajunas by knockout in the second round. And that's a wrap for this episode of the MMA Oracles Podcast. I have been your host, Jack Moon. Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can find me at the MMA Oracles on all of my socials. They will be posted at the end of this video as well. Be sure to check out my website, themmaoracles.wordpress.com, where you can see the written breakdown of my fight predictions, as well as I keep track of my fight predictions against the other top analysts in this predicting fights as well. And then you can see all my rankings for every UFC division. So be sure to head over there and check that out. Let's get into some of my locks for this card. Locks, I do have Stephen Wynn. I think he's taking on Yarno Aarons. Like I mentioned in my prediction, I don't think Yarno Aarons is where he needs to be. I don't think he has the team behind him to get him to where he can compete in the UFC. Stephen Wynn is a guy that's unproven, but he's got Fortis MMA backing him up. So I do see him winning that fight. I got Ricardo Ramos. I think as much as I like Julian Rosa, the guy is, he's 34 years old. He's aging. That chin's not going to get any better. I think Ramos is the younger guy, better team behind him. We'll see him take a win there as well. Trey Ogden, I think Kurt Halabaugh is, aging. I'm pretty sure he's got some injury history. Not a guy that I think is going to go very far. So I think Trey Ogden will be able to outwork him. And then Edmund Shabazian. If he loses that fight, like I said, he should basically retire from MMA. And he's only 27, so he cannot lose that fight. So he is my lock as well. If you throw all four of those guys into a parlay, you're looking at plus 505 odds. That's pretty solid. Play around with that if you want. Take one out. You're looking at, I think, still like plus 300. So still a good bet there in my eyes. Underdogs for the card, I have Igor Severino. I do think his aggression will overcome Andre Lima. And then Cameron Simon, I do see him being the first to defeat Peyton Talbot. Not a great fight card, honestly. Some of these fight night cards have just been really rough. We're waiting on UFC 300 at this point, so it is what it is. But thank you so much for listening. I am signing out. I will see you on the next one.